Hey guys, welcome back to another video and I hope everyone's doing well. In today's video, I'm going to share with you guys my thoughts on using manual settings, aperture priority and shutter priority. But before we start, my name is Ken. I'm a professional wedding photographer traveling all around the world to shoot wedding photos for my clients. So let's go. So using manual settings, aperture priority and shutter speed priority, I'm going to share with you guys my personal experience on using those individual settings in wedding photography only. Now take note of this, although these settings are pretty much standard, but its application will vary depending on what type of photography and what you would like to achieve. And in my case again, we're talking about wedding photography. Alright, let me start off with the type of settings that I use the least and then work my way up to the setting that I use the most. As always, I'm going to keep things short and simple so you won't have like a 30 minutes long boring video explaining each and every single point. I'm going to share with you guys my experience with using that particular setting, the pros, the cons, and when would I use them. Starting off at number 3, my least used settings, the shutter speed priority. Now if you don't know what shutter speed priority is, well, in a nutshell, this is a setting which you are concentrating strictly on shutter speed and care less about the aperture and the ISO. You just need to dial the shutter speed that you want and the camera will automatically decide the aperture and ISO for you to achieve a balanced exposure. Now if you're asking me how shutter speed works, I won't be explaining it in this video as I don't have time running through every detail, and I suggest you do your research via Google or search for videos in YouTube. There should be hundreds and hundreds of these videos available for you guys to learn from. Now shutter speed priority works best if you would like to capture movement trails. But in the case of wedding photography, it's usually best if we freeze moments that are happening. The last thing we would like to capture is the bride walking down the aisles with her face blurred because of us using slow shutter speed. So the pros in using shutter speed priority is it enables us to capture movement trails. And the cons is if used wrongly, it will cause blurry images. I personally do not use shutter priority because it just has no place in the type of photos I'm producing. If I were to capture shots using slow shutter speed, I would always do it with the manual settings and I will explain why later on. Moving on to the next settings, and it's also a setting that I hardly use, the aperture priority. Now similar to shutter speed priority, aperture priority is used when you want to concentrate strictly on aperture. Aperture in general is the one responsible for creating what we call bokeh, which derives from the Japanese language meaning blur, which can be seen in photos where you have the subject in sharp focus and its background all blurred. This is all caused by the depth of field in your camera. And if you are confused and would like to learn more about how aperture works and how it affects the depth of field, again, I'm not going to explain it in detail here as this is not what this video is about. You can find many tutorial videos available on YouTube and learn from there. Okay, so the pros of using aperture priority for my case is I'm able to lock down the depth of field of my photos so that I know my photos will stay sharp and also produce the background blur that I desire. But you have to be careful, as the cons is your camera will be deciding the shutter speed settings. And if it decides to drop to a very slow shutter speed, that will result in very blurry images. As for when I would use them, I would use aperture priority only if I'm shooting at a very fast-paced situation combined with lighting conditions that are changing from time to time. For example, I often face situations when I was shooting overseas, where I'm pressed for time and have to produce shots very quickly, perhaps due to incoming rain or maybe an incoming storm. And that combined with very fast moving clouds that blocks and unblocks the sun every single second. Meaning I have a situation where the light is suddenly bright and then suddenly becomes dark, and then bright and then dark again, every single second. In situations like this, I will have no choice but to keep my camera to assist me in deciding the best exposure for my shots. And if I don't, I might and had faced situations where I already set the camera's exposure and when I pressed the shutter button, the lighting condition changed, which resulted in my shots being severely over or underexposed. So in instances like this, aperture priority does help me a lot to get the best exposure for my shots without me having to worry about changing the settings all the time. Alright, so that leaves us with my number one go-to settings, the manual settings, which obviously manual means I have to dial all my settings by myself. And in other words, I'm in full control of the camera and my shots, which I really like as I love to control every aspect of my shots. My experience in using manual settings started as early as my career, and I had been shooting exclusively using manual settings ever since. What I find exciting about using manual settings will bring us to the pros of using it, which is me being in full control rather than the camera being in control of my shots. Plus, for us to keep playing with the aperture, shutter speed and ISO will also train us to be more familiar with how these three work with each other to create our shots. Not to mention that the more we play with it, the more we get accustomed to it, which will benefit us during our assignments as we are able to change our camera settings as if it's part of our reflexes. Well, if the manual settings gives us full control of our cameras, then does it have any cons at all? Well, with my years of experience using it, the only cons I find about using manual setting is it takes a little bit more time for me to dial all the settings in place. And in the case of wedding photography, sometimes the few extra seconds taken to dial the settings will cause us missing some moments. Not very often though, but sometimes I do miss some shots because of it. So in what situation would I use the manual settings? Well, I use the manual settings all the time, and I do recommend you to do so as well. As a professional photographer, we have to know how to control our camera in and out before relying on the camera to do the shots for us. Just like a pilot who needs to know how to manually take over an aircraft, just in case the automated system is not working as intended. The least situation we want to be in is to be standing there in blankness when something goes wrong with our camera and we are forced to set everything manually. So this concludes the video, but before I end it, let me share with you guys a pro tip on using the aperture and shutter speed priority. Remember not to just blindly use these settings and always be aware of the lighting condition around you. In an unfavorable lighting condition, the camera will sometimes go to the extreme settings just to get the best exposure. And examples of being extreme is going too slow in shutter speed, which will cause your photos to be blurred, or going too high in ISO, which will cause your photos to be very grainy. So you have to be extremely careful when using these semi-automatic settings. Alright, so there you have it guys, my take on using the camera with manual settings, aperture priority and shutter speed priority. There are still many instances on how to use these settings, but these are just based on my personal experience and how they affect my work. I hope you guys find this video helpful, and do remember to like and share this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't do so. I'm ending this video here, and as always, my name is Ken, and I'll see you guys in the next video.